Welcome back to this discussion on the 11th five-year plan perspective. I would like to request Shakila to continue the discussion. We have only 45 minutes for this session, so we would like to take up a lot of issues associated with this discussion. Shakila, should we continue?
Yes, thank you, Poonam. Going back to the slide that we had stopped earlier, just before we wound up. As I mentioned that we are planning to, can we go back to the slide, please? Yeah, coming back, we were talking in terms of access, an issue that someone had raised from Pune in terms of access as far as the urban areas were concerned, but I was also trying to tell Poonam the point that you were talking about a low GER at the higher education, and access is one of the realities where we have more than 50% of our districts not even having a simple degree college. That's a simple arts, science, commerce college. Even if you leave out science, a simple arts, commerce college is not available in the 370 educationally backward districts. And so the target is to set up one degree college in 370 educationally backward districts, and this is with the central assistance, of course, in partnership with the state governments. There are 6,000 colleges which would be given one-time financial assistance, so that an issue which was raised earlier, I think in terms of the infrastructure constraints, these 6,000 colleges which are having problems in terms of non-availability of buildings and classrooms and laboratories and ICT related facilities, those also would be given some sort of financial assistance. And as you know, we have also the idea of deemed universities, and so some 25 old existing deemed universities would also be given some assistance. Coming to the expansion in technical education, though it might not appear very relevant to the particular group that is here, I must think you must know about what the 11th plan thinks in terms of technical education. Also, there is expansion and upgradation of 200 state technical institutions, expansion for centrally funded technical institutions also being thought about. And as you are aware that there has been an oversight committee which looked into the 27% reservation for the other backward classes, which we called as the socially and the educationally backward sections, on which there was a Supreme Court stay. The stay having been lifted, and in terms of expansion for that 27% reservation without affecting the general seats, there has been a 54% expansion being planned for the central universities, for the IITs, the IIMs, for the health institutions, and for the agricultural universities. These were the 5 sectors. Other than these 5 sectors, of course, the Oversight Committee has written to all the ministries wherever there are undergraduate and postgraduate programs being offered, that is a degree awarding kind of a program being there, that they may think in terms of trying to implement this. Because ultimately the purpose is that all of these institutions should make some seats available for the other backward classes. And this also is going by almost on parallel with what the 11th plan is talking about: inclusion, expansion, and excellence. So it's just the terminology has been different. In terms of equity, it's inclusion, and expansion remaining the same, and excellence. Upgrading 7 technical universities also. The last point that I have made has an error. It is establishing 8 new IITs, not 3 IITs. I beg to correct myself. I stand corrected. It is establishing 8 new IITs, 7 new IIMs, 20 National Institutes of Technology, which were earlier called as Regional Engineering Colleges, 5 Indian Institutes of Science, Education and Research, 3 presently being functional in Pune, Mohali and in Kolkata, 20 triple ITs, that is Indian Institutes of Information and Technology, 2 schools of planning and architecture, and 50 centers of training and research in frontier areas. This is what is being planned in technical education, and this, if you can see, is going to make a huge difference. One is, of course, access would also be there, because the expansion in the seats would have access, and also the issues of equity have also been addressed. And the location of these IITs and IIMs and NITs, all this would be as per a mapping that is being done, so that unserved areas are unserved or underserved areas are sought to be covered. Coming to equity as such, I'll just run through this because I want the teachers and the administrators sitting at the other end to really react on academic reforms. I'm just running through this because this is just facts being stated. New colleges and universities to be set up in EBDs or educationally backward. UGC to provide special development grants to universities and colleges with a higher proportion of SC and STs and minority students, and also for hostels. 250 universities and 3,000 colleges to be assisted for setting up women's hostel in a phased manner, and provision of a substantial number of scholarships for minorities in higher and professional education, and close monitoring under what is being called as the Prime Minister's 15-point program for the minorities, and revised norms and a meaningful quantum of scholarship. I must say that scholarships is going to be one of our thrust areas to address the issue of means being a factor that has been deterring students from coming in for higher education. While educational loans are very popular for foreign studies, the same is not so as far as going in for higher education in the Indian universities and colleges. And therefore the banks have been sort of instructed that they must sort of give publicity to the idea of educational loans for undergoing normal degree courses over here or PG courses, and also that the interest subsidy would be also substantial so that these students are sort of given the facility to take up these scholarships. So I must say that the whole point of your high GER going to come in is through scholarships, where we think that someone who doesn't have the means but has the merit and has the potential and has a desire to go in for higher education, then that should not be a deterrent, and we should be able to facilitate that. Coming to quality now, and these are the issues that which might be directly impacting teachers. We are trying to talk about ensuring higher standards in teaching. Now, I must admit that this sounds very empty as a statement, and it is left to you as the stakeholders how you are going to do about that. The fact that you are doing a postgraduate diploma in higher education as a program where you will get the necessary pedagogic skills for going in for higher education teaching itself is a welcome step. In that same light, I think you need to pass the message around and try and see that there are more potential teachers who take up this kind of a program so that you are sort of pedagogically trained. In fact, one reason why teaching is not considered a profession is that they say that anybody who sort of completed maybe a PG level program, maybe a master's, and has qualified a NET with or without MPhil and PhD is able to come in for teaching. Whereas what is the kind of professional skills that you have? So there is a need for doing programs like PGDHE, and I'm not trying to say this in terms of trying to market the PGDHE program, but also trying to tell it in terms of saying that you need certain kind of skills to start going into a class and trying to have a classroom transaction which is meaningful. It is very difficult to transact an educational curriculum in a meaningful manner. The less of chalk and talk classroom teaching. 25 years or so back when we started teaching, we used the chalk and talk method. I would still say that a substantial number of us today over here are still dependent on the chalk and talk method. And it's not that ICT is being confined only for the ODL system. It should be used even in the regular classroom transactions. You can have PowerPoint presentations. I'm not trying to market Microsoft. I'm only trying to use the terminology I'm not having a substitute for. You can have PowerPoint presentations. You can have interactive technology being used in classroom transaction. A compulsory interactive and tutorial seminar system, practical content in teaching learning, and the last point is something I'd like you all to reflect upon: education in human values to be an integral part of the education system. Poonam, it will be surprising to note that those who go in for engineering, medical sciences, and for the so-called science-related areas, there is a total absence of human values being there. And there is, you find that humanism as a quality of any citizen of the country is a very crucial factor in molding his character. And it is not just the material things that we need to really run around for. So there is an importance or a stress being given to education in human values. Faculty related issues, I think someone had made this point of how are you going to address the vacuum of teaching faculty. The teaching system is going to be made more attractive to retain best talent with funded research. One is so that people go in for higher education,
Shakila, can we take this call from
Yes,
Hyderabad?
yes.
Hyderabad, please.
Good afternoon, Poonam and Shakila Shamsu. It is glad to see Madam Shakila Shamsu now after long gap. We have two participants here. One is a lecturer in Government IAS Hyderabad. Another is a lecturer in Computer Science from Kurnool. One question to Madam Shakila Shamsu is, Madam, what is this higher education gamut, what we plan in the planning commission, whether it is conventional BA, BCom or other vocational educations like that? Because there may be people who are like motorcycle mechanics who may not be educated in the conventional way, but he may be graduated in his own way. So what I feel is there should be a certification of prior learning for all such candidates who are beyond the conventional education. One of our participants has a question.
Madam Shakila ji and Poonam ji, these are some of my questions. As our Deputy Director of Regional Center already asked, we would like to know the definition of higher education. Whether the technical institutions like IITs and IMS are included in higher education or not. In 11th 5-year plan, already is it included or is going to be included? That we would like to know. And in that question only, this is inclusion of the technical educations like IIT and IMS only to improve the percentage of the GER, or is it the growth of the enrollment? That is the first question. Second question, Madam, the budget which is allotted to the higher education for the establishment of new institutions and the computer-aided learning, that is good, it is appreciated and welcome, but in that manner it should be a cumulative process. There are, as you said just now, there are 30 to 35% vacancies in higher education institutions. So better appointing the post, filling the posts, then strengthening the colleges, then it is better to go for the new colleges. That would be better. Plus the infrastructure development also needed in every college. For every district there must be a degree college. My third question is, Madam, and in 11th 5-year plan, our target is only 15%. The world average is 23%, but our expectation and plan is below that 23%. So our expectation and hopes, that should be better and more than the 23%. For that the budget should be allotted. These are my questions, Madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hyderabad. That was really a long list of questions. I think we'll be taking them up as we go along with the slides.
Yes.
So, Shakila, would you like to continue? Because I think we just have about half an hour left and lots of issues still to come up.
Yes, in fact, this particular slide, if we can go back, I'll just run through and I'll take up those questions which came up from Hyderabad so that they don't go out of my mind also. One, of course, was a point which would address what is being asked also, that the teaching system is going to be made attractive to retain. See, the fact is people are not going in for teaching. It is being seen as a last option. As being a teacher ourselves, I think we need to be realistic that teaching is no longer being seen as a very attractive profession, and it's because of a love for teaching that people are coming into it, not because the pay packet is very attractive or the whole incentive or the package as such seems to be very attractive. It's more of a value that we have, that we should be able to teach, and therefore we have come into it. But there is also a fact that we need to, just as you might find software industry or engineering or medical fields or any of these other employment opportunities being seen as attractive, the teaching should also be seen attractive, and that is why we are trying to see that there is funded research being provided through the UGC, through their JRFs. My last point over here, substantial increase in the JRFs, and also for the net qualified and the non-net qualified also there are going to be incentives so that people go in for research. There is also a share of the project funds being given for researchers, so that once you get a share of consultancy and the project funds, that is also seen as an incentive for people to remain in the teaching faculty.
This question has just come in from Pune Regional Center. I think since you're talking about net, you could take this up also. It's from
Yes.
Sanjay Dhabade.
Dabade, yes. There is also the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research. This is basically to address the faculty vacuum that is being felt in terms of the engineering and the technical institutions. Infusion of knowledge capital with institutions of higher learning through MOU, that is a tie-up with institutions where resource persons or resource pool is available, so that it could be on a sharing of the faculty. And the UGC net, this still remains. I must mention that in spite of all our, whether we like it or not, as being from the teaching community, in a meeting with the state secretaries, where there was a feeling of whether doctoral candidates need to be exempted from the net qualification, people first felt, this is the state education secretaries, they first felt that let us take in a net qualified person. Even if you have a choice between a PhD holder and a net qualified, the state universities and the colleges would take in first a net qualified and then go in for a doctoral degree. Now the member planning commission was quite taken aback, having been the Vice Chancellor of Bombay University himself. Professor Mungekar was alarmed at the thought that the state secretaries were of this view that a preference should be given to a net qualified person vis-a-vis a PhD holder. But the idea was that they were saying that we are not trying to sort of bring down the value of the PhD candidate, but we are only trying to say that if there are net qualified candidates, then they should not remain unemployed in the market, having qualified an eligibility test for teachers. Therefore, they should be given the employment opportunity first, whereas a PhD scholar would still be able to get higher research avenues being open to them and maybe going in for higher levels of teaching. But for a lecturer level to come in, they felt that it was basically the net qualified. So I think what
Sanjay's question is also related. He feels that why is it necessary to have a net when you already have a UG and PG qualification for the teacher?
No, the UG and PG qualified teachers, in spite of, when you say that even a PhD should not sort of be given preference over a net, I don't think we could even go down in terms of saying that UG and PG teachers, why net should be there. It has been accepted that one is to make teachers being seen as professionals, that you should have some entry qualification other than just the basic educational qualification. In fact, there is a lot of loud thinking, if I may say so, that there should be something like, just as there are public selection for the enterprises board for the banks and things like that, and the UPSC for the civil servants, in that same line they're thinking that net is almost to be seen as a kind of a equivalent kind of a entry criteria for entering into higher education. So I think it is very difficult to change the mindset, because there was a committee which went into it. There has been a lot of restructuring that has been done, and maybe they will increase the number of candidates who are qualifying the net from the present percentile to maybe a higher, to a still lower percentile, so that, see, ultimately you are not compromising on merit, but you will have more people who are net qualified, and so that they would be able to go in for the teaching profession. So that might address maybe the fact that net has been considered as something so tough and seen more as an examination for elimination, not for an examination for facilitating someone coming in for teaching. But without compromising on the merit part of it, they are trying to say that the percentile be brought down so that more people would be able to come in, and that they would try to do this in requirement to the need for the faculty. Right now it has been sort of in two watertight compartments, net being conducted as an examination and not trying to see what is the faculty requirement of the country as a whole. So that is sort of trying to be matched. So maybe that might address what
the 35% deficit also
yes,
could be
also
addressed.
Could be addressed into that. I may take up the Hyderabad questions before I go to the next slide, and that is in terms of growth of enrollment, yes, one is of course higher education in the budget includes the technical education. So that when we are talking about a 15% GER by 2012 and a 20% GER by 2020, we are going to take into account the enrollment that is taking place in all the IITs, IIMs and all the other technical institutions and the state technical institutions also. So all of that comes within that. As far as the budget also, when we are talking about the 84,000 crores, it is inclusive of the expansion for the technical education. So the technical education does come as a species within the genus of higher education. The other point is, therefore, the GER, when we talk of growth in enrollment, would take into account the enrollment growth that is taking place in the technical institutions. The point that we go in for the faculty shortages and then go in for the expansion might appear a bit myopic, for the simple reason that when you have budget being provided, I think the two needs to go simultaneously. And that is why we may not be able to say that, okay, in the 11th plan, let's concentrate on the faculty issues only, make up for all the faculty, and then go in for establishing the institutions. Let us also be fair that all these IITs, IIMs, schools of planning and architecture, IISER, 370 degree colleges, 14 world-class universities, 16 central universities, they are all in the pipeline and in the formation. That takes about a year and a half and all to come through. It might more or less become realistically functional only maybe 2 years from now. And in the meantime, all these faculty and sort of attracting provisions would try to ensure that these faculty are also in position. But we can't say that have that first and then go in for this.
And also it might be skewed also. This 35% may not be like evenly
Yes,
distributed,
it's not
you know. So
evenly
you need
distributed.
to be multi-pronged in your strategies with regard to higher education.
Higher education. And I think the third point that we were talking in terms was whether the degree colleges would only be the BA BCom. I think I lost track of that last question that was being asked from. Yeah, there was also a question about the vocational
GR
education.
percentage also, that why is it being pitched at 15%?
Yeah,
only
lesser
when
than the expectations. I think we should be realistic, because it's not easy to say at 2012 we'll achieve 20%. We have just started thinking in terms of the 370 degree colleges and the new central universities. So I think putting 15%, when you say it's 23% the world average, but you then say no, we'll also try and reach 23. When you take a review of the 11th plan performance and you find that you have only reached somewhere near 12 and 13, then you might find yourself putting yourself at a very dismal kind of a performance. I think targets have got to be realistically matched, and therefore putting it at 15% by 2012. Let me also tell you that the working groups who were there felt that putting a target of 20% even by 2020 was not seen as very easy to achieve. It is not seen that we would be able to really achieve that. But let's move towards that.
But Shakila, how much of this would be coming into the open and distance learning?
That segregation, I think, has not been taken into account. And ODL also would be able to make up for a huge gap of that enrollment. And with the fact that new state open universities would come up, and these universities are offering job relevant, sort of employment relevant kind of courses, I think we might be able to meet that target. If we achieve that 15% by 2012 with the ODL system, then I think putting a higher target in the 12th plan might then be seen, and therefore we might not be falling much below the expectations. A question which Hyderabad also raised was about the vocational qualification. Let me talk that it's in a different mode from here. There is a national vocational qualifications framework which is being worked, where there is a lateral structure plus a multiple entry and exit structure being thought about, where you will have a priori learning, being certified, and then giving them a mainstream opportunity to join the higher education. So there is the Ministry has been thinking in terms of about a vocational education framework, where they would certify those who have, by virtue of their experience in the field plus the skills that they have, be given some sort of a certification, and then on the basis of that certification may be allowed to join the 12th or the degree level. So there is a mainstream being thought for them also. Sorry. Going back to our slides, because we just not run against time. Academic reforms, the annual examination systems to be replaced with a semester system, the introduction of internal evaluation or internal assessment, universities to revise or restructure curricula at least once in 3 years, and revisions being subjected to outside peer review before implementation, credit transfer among courses and between universities, introducing interdisciplinary courses and demand or market driven courses, and a grading system of evaluation. I'll just run through that slide. These are not new to us. These are reforms that all of us have been thinking about, and which we are trying to see is going to be linked to funding. That is the interesting point. These reforms are to be implemented by the colleges affiliated to state level universities and to the central universities, and all the 400 and odd universities plus the 20,000 odd colleges would be funded only if they sort of try and make attempts to implement these reforms. So the stand that is being taken by the UGC, the MHRD and the Planning Commission, and toto therefore the Government of India, is that academic reforms are a precondition for getting funding. And with this we try to break the status quo and sort of try and implement academic reforms. This is also an interesting development. Fully electronic universities and digital campuses. This is, I must mention, when I prepared this slide, which was some time earlier, I have talked about 378 universities and 18,000 colleges. The number has gone up. I think MHRD would have to rework on their ICT mission with a larger number now. ICT coverage in all the universities and colleges in a phased manner. There is supposed to be an integrated knowledge network, national knowledge network, that is going to be set up in collaboration with MHRD and DIT or Department of Telecommunications. There is broadband connectivity and networking of institutions being planned all across the country. Virtual classrooms, teleconference. This, for those who are in the ODL system, is not something new, but this is what is being planned for the general higher education scenario. Virtual classrooms, teleconferencing, video conferencing, digital libraries, advanced computational facilities in select institutions. Now we come to, I think we have, two, would we like to have any questions coming, or I'll complete this whole presentation and maybe we could have. Poonam was desirous that we talk about globalization, and we have of course accepted that, or we have at least as a country not given our stand on our committing itself to the education services under the GATS framework. But policies have to be liberalized to allow for 100% foreign direct investment on an automatic route and to permit participation in higher education. So with that, we are going to have a lot of foreign universities sort of set up their campuses or their extension offices in this part of the world. But in the 11th plan, we are saying that there is a need to formulate a positive policy to encourage top-class foreign universities and institutions to set up collaborative institutions in partnership with both public and private institutions. The degree should be of the same quality and standards of education as in their own countries. Now here, there are 2 or 3 issues that come about. One is that we feel that we should not put ourselves into a walled city kind of a situation, and we should allow foreign universities to have an entry into the Indian campuses. It should not be seen that that competition is sort of harmful to the Indian universities. It should be seen as being a participatory exercise where in the global knowledge economy, we would be able to take advantage of these universities which might come about with globally relevant kind of curricula, so that our successful students who join these universities and complete their courses can become globally employable as far as the global opportunities are concerned. And therefore the policy should sort of be encouraging for that. Right now there seems to be that though there is 100% FDI being allowed, there seems to be a resistance from some other sources, maybe extrapolatory kind of sources, where we are not able to encourage them to come in over here. For example, you might find that they might not be necessary to tune themselves to maybe the policies of the government, and therefore they may not find themselves easy to come over here. But whatever it is, we need to try and find out what is it that is hindering them, and if so, encourage them to come in. The other point is the public-private partnership mode. Now, though we say that it is education is a responsibility of the government, ultimately those who are passing out of these so-called prestigious institutions and going back have to give back something to the society. And I think the corporate world has to give back its share of profit into the development of the country. And that is why we are talking about the private partnership coming about. NASSCOM has been sort of asked, the CII, ASSOCHAM, all these chambers of industry and commerce have been asked to think in terms of how they could also take up a share of the responsibility of the government in the education sector. And therefore PPP mode is being encouraged, both in terms of local institutions, national institutions, also in terms of foreign institutions that come in. The last point, of course, is that if you are going to have global universities or international universities setting up their campuses, then, and we are going to have international students coming over here and faculty also coming in from outside, we should also be able to maintain a certain standard which is globally on par. And that is why we say that the degree should be of the same quality and standards. So this is as far as globalization, and the point that Poonam was mentioning at the beginning of liberalization and privatization and globalization has a beautiful acronym called LPG, or rather an abbreviation called LPG these days being used. So in addition to PPP and LPG, we are thinking in terms of throwing open the education sector, plus the 11 plan targets in terms of expansion, equity and excellence. I think it's the boom period for education sector. And I think as stakeholders, we all need to take advantage of this. I'll just conclude with this issue that is being put, and maybe this could be thought about. Future is of the knowledge economy. Only presently 10% of the people in the 18 to 24 age group are enrolled in higher education institutions in the country. Employability is at stake, a point I had mentioned earlier. And the last thing, that unless access, equity and quality of higher education is ensured, it would be difficult to fully leverage our demographic advantage of expanding young workforce. The whole idea, Poonam, is to ensure that we try to convert the demographic advantage that we have into a dividend rather than into a liability. I think these were that. If there were any issues that questions we had not taken up, we could take up that, or we could have questions coming in also.
Thank you, Shakila, so much. That was really a very good and insightful insider's view of the Planning Commission and what is being thought of in terms of priorities and thrust areas in the coming years. At this point, I would like all our learners to please interact with Shakila and ask questions, because a lot of things have been covered. We've talked about the thrust areas in the coming years. We've also talked about what are the responsibilities of the teachers which are going to be expected out of them. What is this change scenario going to call from the teacher in terms of, what he or she is expected to do in the classroom, also of professional development and so on and so forth. We've talked about the foreign investment in education taking place. How is that scenario going to change, whether that will affect equity considerations or not? So there are a lot of interesting issues which have been thrown up in this discussion, and I would like the learners to make full advantage of Shakila's presence here. In the meantime that we wait for the questions to come in, Shakila, I have a few issues which I want you to address. One is this, that when we talk about the foreign direct investment, are we also thinking in terms of some kind of a regulatory mechanism? Because few studies from NEPA, there was a cell which was set up with regard to the functioning of the foreign universities, and it was found that the kind of quality courses which is being offered here were not of the same standards as they would be doing in their own countries. Second thing is this, that when we are looking at inclusion in a big way, we are talking about the educationally and socially backward being included into this cohort. I mean, is there any responsibility which the foreign universities are expected to perform in this area? And the third thing is that the private and the public partnership, I mean any kind of a partnership, because that is also being seen. I've looked at a few instances where anything and everything would go just because it is a thrust area. So I mean, is there any kind of a benchmark or so?
Responding to that, Poonam, I must mention.
Yes, Koraput, yes, please ask your question.
I am Dr. M. Pradhan from Koraput, now joining as a resource person. To Madam Shakila, you have mentioned a lot of proposals during 11th plan to enhance equity, expansion and excellence in higher education, particularly during 11th plan. But at this moment we have not been able to appropriately strengthen our higher education system, as I feel.
I think the lines got disconnected.
Yeah.
We would still request Koraput, please call again, because there is a problem with the line.
Yes. No, in fact, the point he was trying to say possibly is his concern that while we are talking of expansion, is there something being thought in terms of consolidation? And I think a very valid point.
Yes.
And that is why if you see as one of our slides earlier, I think, which we had, sorry. If we had a slide which, let me just come to that. Yeah, when we're talking in terms of expansion and upgradation, in fact, even the earlier slide where I said 6,000 colleges would be strengthened, this would be the point that he is trying to say. As far as UGC funding goes, if you don't have the minimum space for a classroom or a particular college, playground facilities, plus the examination halls, the laboratories, the library, and so, they treat this as being sort of second rate and not being given any financial assistance. Now you can't leave them in the lurch. It is like a backward place being left backward because they couldn't come up to a certain
Exactly, yes,
position.
yes.
So you need to sort of strengthen a weak child. In that same sense, these are considered as the weak colleges, and therefore there is a sort of one-time financial assistance being planned for them.
Yes.
That would,
Yes.
yes.
Koraput, yes, please. Continue, please.
Madam, kindly show the last slide, that is issues in Indian higher education. And my question was, at this juncture, when we have not appropriately strengthened the higher education system, we should, will it be appropriate to allow foreign universities with 100% foreign direct investment?
Yes,
Your opinion, please. Thank you.
Can we have the last slide, please? Yes.
Can we focus on the last slide? Yes, I think he can. You can see the last slide. I fully appreciate your concern on the need on foreign universities coming, and what was Poonam also trying to say. We are trying to see that we stop fly-by-night operators coming in. We are also trying to see and regulate that if these foreign universities come in, they will stick to the policies, including reservation policies that we have, so that our concerns of equity are taken care of. But the point that you are trying to say, that these foreign universities, if they are only thinking in terms of profit motives, by offering what may be their lesser or their inferior courses into the Indian market and get sort of economic return from that, that would definitely have to be regulated. Maybe that is the reason why we find we are going slow, and there's no harm in going slow. The concern that Koraput is raising, that while we have not been able to strengthen our own, whether we should allow that, let us understand that India being a vast country where there is a need or a demand for higher education, and there is one section of the population who is willing to pay for it. Just as we are talking in terms of addressing the equity concern, there is an elitist group who is willing to pay for it, then they need not go out of the country and go in for higher education. The whole reverse brain drain that is taking place now, where you have a lot of software engineers coming back to work for one's own country, is seen as a welcome step. In that light, if we can retain our own intelligent student population to do in courses with these foreign universities rather than go abroad, and see that they become employable here itself, so that later on whatever capital is being generated from their enterprise is being again used for the development of our own nation, might in the long run pay off. And that is the logic by which we are allowing that kind of foreign investment to come in. I think we should accept that also as a reality. We can't really put all these into watertight and allow it to take place as moving from one compartment to the other. The whole of it should be seen as something, central focus being the expansion, excellence and equity in higher education, by allowing all these kind of a framework. On one side, vocational education, job relevant courses, allowing foreign investment, public-private partnership coming in, strengthening existing colleges and expanding. So it should be rather like a spectrum rather than in a linear fashion the growth taking place. It should be multi-pronged. You cannot allow it to have it as a single sector and focusing only on one area. I think that is where, of course, we'll come to know this only when we take a review of the 11th plan.
Yes. Can we have the call from Pune, please? Pune, please ask your question.
Hello.
Go ahead.
In addition to the NAAC parameters for assessing quality in education, are there any other benchmarks or standard being set up? One more question, please.
Madam, I am Anupama calling from the Regional Pune Center. Is there any common Indian framework in the universities for offering the credit-based courses? Thank you.
Yeah. Coming to NAC and its benchmarking, I must try to tell you what is the loud thinking taking place. We are talking in terms of having multiple rating agencies. How this is going to evolve, because it is still in the thinking stage, but NAC might be like an overall rating agency for the other rating agencies. But at the same time, we are also trying to say that different sets of performance indicators or best practices or benchmarking practices needs to be evolved. There is nothing, right now in the absence of anything else, yes, NAC remains. But there is nothing that prevents other benchmarking and best practices being put up or being developed. I think apex educational institutions are already being sounded off to think in terms of benchmarking, and accrediting agencies also going to be more than one. And also in the light of whatever recommendations have come in from the National Knowledge Commission, we have accepted that it might be difficult for NAC as one accrediting agency for all the 20,000 colleges and all the 400 and odd universities. I think it would be a yeoman task to think in terms of NAC alone being the accrediting agency. So I think as teachers, you can also think in terms in your, one of your project areas could be what would be the performance or the benchmarking practices that you could think of in higher education from maybe academic curricula from one side or examination system from another on a specific area could be a good project work for you in the ECP itself. And the other question that had come about...
framework for credit transfer.
Yeah, framework for credit transfer. Right now, let us be clear that unless you have a standardized set of curricula being followed by the universities, it would be very difficult. Even the nomenclature of courses are so different. You might have somewhere it being called as bachelor's in computer science, somewhere it is being called as, no, it is sort of information technology. So unless you have a standardized curricula in place, you cannot have a credit system that is being operationalized. So right now with the academic reforms, we are talking in terms of both this. Even AICTE has been asked to think in terms of whether there could be a standardized nomenclature being followed, and if so, match the curricula and then allow for the credit transfer. It would evolve in the long run, something that's not very far off.
Shakila, just one last question because we just have about 2 minutes left. Very interesting observation which you made was with regard to these world-class universities which you said would be located in the urban elite areas. But wouldn't that lead to some kind of a dualism? You again have a set of advantaged people getting access to the world-class, whereas you have a whole lot of people who will just barely be able to manage to get into a degree college.
Poonam, I might mention it over here that on one side when we talk of those degree colleges in the backward areas, that was addressed for them. But moment we say a world-class university, it does put in an element of elitism into that. But then that is with the other aspect that we should also become on the global map. And if we try and locate it in a remote area, you would not be able to get international students and international faculty. In fact, a huge debate that is being taking place with the state secretaries is they would like to know what is the distinction between a world-class university and a central university. Well, in terms of curriculum, they are going to be multidisciplinary, and also they are going to offer globally relevant courses. In fact, we are still trying to define that in finer terms. But in terms of location, world-class universities may not necessarily be in urban metros, whereas world-class universities, central universities would not be in metros, but world-class universities would, we would have to take that with a pinch of salt that there might be an elitism that comes in with that. But that is to put India onto the global map.
So we have come to the end of this very interesting session, and I must say that we managed to cover a whole range of issues, starting from what is the major thrust in the 11th five-year plan, which turned out to be 3 E's as was mentioned: equity, excellence and expansion, to the kind of responsibilities which the teacher in higher education is supposed to share in the context of these developments which are taking place both at the national level and also the international level. We've also talked about the academic reforms which are being suggested, and what is the scenario which is likely to come up when we look at globalization and we look at India as a global player as well. So these are the issues which we managed to cover, and I think in the context of MES 101, we have in a sense talked about what is the current thinking and what thinking will be influenced in the, at least in the 5 years to come. So we have a fairly good perspective about some of the current issues which are confronting higher education at this moment. I think at this point I would like to thank Shakila for a very, very comprehensive presentation on the 11th 5-year plan perspective. I would also like to thank all the learners who have very actively participated in the discussions for this session. At the same time, I would like to thank all my colleagues at the regional centers for cooperating always, and also this time for making ECP a success. We have just begun, and I am sure that next 9 days would be as interactive and meaningful for the learners and also for us as resource persons to be on this program. The rest of the session will be continued, as you know, in a face-to-face mode. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, we have a session which is course design 1 and which relates to MES 102. I hope you will prepare for that session and also enjoy your interactions which will be there now following this session. Thank you very much once again, and thank you, Shakila.
Thank you, Poonam, and thank you to the EMPC studio and all the learners at the regional centers. Thank you.